Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by another bloke. We've got some more blokes on the show. Great, Doug Dubrish. Great to see you. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, Simon. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So Doug and I spoke yesterday, and some of the things that happened to Doug early in his life really stood out for me. Like put my the hairs on my neck back, up and erect. It was a tingling kind of sensation, and the first thing that one of the first things that Doug explained to me is the fact that he had what's called a near death experience, and these are a lot more common. He explained they're a lot more common than people might first imagine. So I think you said there was 600 a day in the US alone.
Actually, 800.
Oh, so 800, right? That's my memory
that I have read. Yeah.
Yeah. Should have looked at my notes for that one, Doug. These I've read an account of one of these near-death experiences from a lady called Anita Morjani. And it really is very, very powerful stuff. To hear it off a guy like Doug, who is a very pragmatic, a scientific guy, a guy who's been in the military, in the Air Force, a guy who's been an air traffic controller. So this guy's somebody that's rooted very much in reality, not some, I don't know, slightly way out tree hugger kind of person. Do you know what I mean? It really landed for me. So could you describe your near-death experience for the listeners? And listeners, I am going to draw all this together because you might be thinking, what on earth has Doug's near-death experience got to do with adoption? It has. Just bear with me. Please do not press stop on the podcast.
Well, Simon, when I had my near-death experience, I was a young boy, 5 or 6 years old. Now, this experience is something that you don't forget. Now, back in the day that this happened was the late 1950s. We lived on a horseshoe-shaped canal going into Sylvan Lake in Michigan. It was dredged out in the late 1930s. I was adopted and an only child, and I was, looking back on it, grateful that I had the opportunity to have the canal, because we would frequently swim in the canal on a hot summer's day in Michigan. And what I used to do, they had they used it as a lifesaver. It was kind of like a football that you'd wear on your back, and it would clip in the front. The football lived on a nail just inside our garage door. So I would go get it, clip it on, run down to the canal and jump off the dock. Well, my dad was coming home from work. It was like on a Friday, I would say. And so the idea came that since it's hot, we'd go ahead and take a swim. Of course, with that being a young child, I darted out the door ahead of him and headed on down the hill. But what I forgot to do is to stop by the garage and get this football and attach it. So when I jumped off the dock, I went all the way down to the bottom of the canal, and I felt the sand that was underneath my feet, realizing at that point that I did not have this lifesaver on. I pushed myself towards the dock to try and grab a hold of it so I could pull myself out. My hand did go above the water, but it sunk down. I tried to push off again, reached my hand out. I could not reach the dock. Of course, by that time, as a young boy and having just ran, I needed to take a breath. I was kind of in shock with what was going on, but I knew I had to take a breath. So I did. And of course, at that point, the water entered my lungs, and at that point, I died. Now, over the years, I've been able to think about how I can liken this experience to people who haven't had one. When I died, it became dark. Of course, I was frightened, and I felt as though if you were to close your eyes and take the elevator up, you have that sensation of upward movement. That's what it felt like. And of course, I was frightened, but then suddenly, in this darkness, I felt a sense of calm. I felt as though there was somebody around me. I couldn't see them, but I could feel their presence. And what I mean by feel their presence, again, if you were to close your eyes and walk slowly towards a wall, when you got near that wall, you would have that feeling of presence. That's how it felt. I knew then that everything was going to be all right. Again, I couldn't see. It was dark. I wouldn't say pitch black, but dark. Suddenly I heard a voice, and the voice said to me in a baritone voice, "It's not your time." Now, that voice, when I heard it, envision yourself sitting in a library. It's absolutely quiet, and somebody came behind you unknowingly and suddenly came loudly with a trumpet. It was like a startling, shocking sensation. Well, at that point, I felt myself start to go down the elevator, let's just say. But I could see this time at the end that there was a light. And as I grew closer to the light, I started to see the spectacle of a man standing with a child laying on his stomach, and the man was pushing his back to get the water out of his mouth. Well, I was perhaps 40, 50 feet above watching this scene, and it dawned on me at the time that that was me. And all of a sudden, I felt I was back in my body. I could feel the water coming out of my mouth, and I started coughing, and I remember that I had the most intense headache that I've ever had to this day. I don't know if I had a headache like that now that I'm much older, if I could have tolerated it. But I think as a young boy, I was able to. So I got up, went and sat in a lounge chair and just kind of recovered. And Dad started grilling hot dogs, I think, on the Barbie, I think, as you call it.
Yeah.
Back in those days, I wouldn't give it a second thought about trying to talk to somebody about what happened or the experience. It just happened. And as a child, I didn't say anything to my parents. My dad knew what happened. I'm not sure to this day if my adoptive mother knew what happened. And as an adult, when my adoptive father, because my adoptive mother passed away when I was 16, he would come to visit. But when he came to visit, I had 3 children, and he came, and there were the kids, and we're talking about what's going on in life and all that kind of thing. I never had the opportunity to ask him about that incident when I was a young boy. I really regret that. But you always think, oh, there'll be another day.
Yeah.
You'll have another day to go ahead and ask your dad things. That day just never came.
Yeah.
But that was my experience. And oftentimes older people, when they have an experience like this, they can see a change in their life because it does bring about a change. But as a young child, I didn't know how this could really have changed me until I started to grow up. What it did, though, I will say this, because I reflected back on it many, many times. Incidentally, I never shared this with anyone until I went in the military and I became friends with one of the guys in my squadron. I did share it with him, but other than that, I didn't share it with anybody because it will affect your career. If you have a career of some kind and you're trying to build professionalism and you start talking about the near-death experience that you had, people are going to think you're crazy. And I knew that. So I kept it to myself. But the thing is, it told me a lot about consciousness as I look back on it over the years. Um, you know, when I began, because I think a person begins to read scripture and of different kinds, and not that I'm religious, because I think that there's many religions in the world as there are people. But I did want to find out, where did I go? Where could I find, you know, some answers to those questions? Well, what I came to find out and believe is that what we normally think of as the Holy Spirit is consciousness as it's expressed inside ourselves. So that was my near-death experience. And of course, it led me to different things. You know, I learned that, you know, a human being is a being of light and actually emits photons. Now, I'd like, please, look that up, Google it or whatever, fact check. But the fact of the matter remains that human beings are made of light and emit photons. So anyway, for many decades, I studied all kinds of things in regards to the consciousness. And of course, being adopted, I looked back and I thought to myself, well, why, you know, was I given up? And, you know, I learned that I was adopted at a very early age.
Yeah. So the before and after, because you were 5 or 6, you said that you weren't aware of before and after. So this best-selling book, Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani, describes this lady's near-death experience when she's a lot older and she was about to die of cancer. And the before and after is poles apart. And but I think you use the word calm. That probably sums it up. It sums it up. It doesn't quite do justice to it, because this Anita Moorjani describes a woman. She describes herself as being very down on herself, felt very insecure, felt she wasn't good enough, felt I don't know. She felt severely othered, I think, is one of the ways that before this near-death experience. And after this near-death experience, it was as if the negative voice in her head just disappeared completely. She was completely fearless after that. And so calm is a great way to put a handle on it. So that's what these near-death experiences often do. They lead to a transformation in the way that the person that has the near-death experience sees themselves and sees the world. Okay, so that's the near-death experience. So forward on a few months or so, maybe a year, you found out whilst playing at your grandma's house, I think it was, that you were adopted. So can you take the listeners through that, please?
Yes, I will. But one more thing about my near-death experience that I'd like to say.
Sure, go for it.
When I died, keep in mind that I had that feeling of calm. Well, you still have feelings after you die. Curiously, I heard a voice. So you're still able to hear after you die. And then when I was coming back to my body, I was able to see, because I wasn't yet in my body. So I want to make sure that people understand that after you die, you're still able to feel, you're still able to hear, and you're still able to see. This is really very important, I think these things may have been because people have had near-death experiences for thousands and thousands of years, all over the world, different religions, New Delhi or in Egypt, it doesn't matter. People are having near-death experiences every day, and they have the same experience of having feeling, hearing, seeing. So you still keep your senses, and I think this is consciousness working through us, moving us toward a more intense form of awareness.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say that because I think it's important to keep that in mind when you're meeting other people. So now to get to my story about when I learned, I was about 6 years old, and my adoptive parents, we'd go down to see my grandmother who lived in Detroit. And underneath her sofa, when we got there, there were Tinker toys. And I think most people, I think, know what those are, and Lincoln Logs. So when I got there, of course, I'd give Grandma a hug, and then I'd go ahead, sit on the living room floor, reach underneath and get the toys and play with them. Well, I was doing this. I was about 6 years old, I believe, playing with the Tinker toys, and there was a pause in the adult conversation in the room. And my grandmother said, "Vic, you know he's not yours." And my mother said, "He's sitting right there." So I continued to play, but I heard that conversation and I wondered about it. I didn't ask any questions, but I wondered about it. I think probably what I did is I got up, and Grandma had a bowl of mints on her table. I probably got up and grabbed a couple of mints, and maybe I gave her the stink eye. I don't remember, but that's what happened. So I knew about it then. Well, then growing up, I was an only child and a curious one at that, but I don't think any different than any other child growing up having curiosities. So around the house, I'd explore, and I found a metal box, in the closet, my parents' closet. I'm just looking around. Well, as I got older, I think I was in maybe first or second grade learning how to read. I had gone to that metal box again. I had files. I pulled them out, and I saw the adoption papers. And it had little boy Whitehead on there, who I came to find out was me. So I knew early in life that I was adopted. I wasn't shocked when I became an adult, say 40 years old. And then when I was told, it was like a volcano going off, as some people have described to me. It wasn't like that. But looking back, as an adoptee, I don't know now if when people adopt, if they have to go through a course or any kind of training. But what I would recommend is that when you adopt a child, you tell that child that they are adopted, tell them with love, and tell them when they're 13 or 14 years old. Because at that age, it gives them time before they become 18 as an adult, go off to university, but to deal with this concept. And I'd like to point out there also is at the age of 13, I'm not Jewish, but they celebrate a bas mitzvah and a bar mitzvah, and there's a reason for that. Because anciently, they believed that when children became 13 years old, they're able to read the Torah, that they became a man. And they still hold those same ceremonies when Jewish kids turn of age. There's something about that age. People begin to be more socially significant, caring about how people look at them and that kind of thing. So I think, I believe that that's the time that you should be telling your children who are adopted with love, like I said, that they're adopted. Because to find this out later in life, it is a shock. And the fact of the matter is, it really is there's a powerful psychological need for certainty and control. And once you learn that you're adopted later on in life, you kind of blow your cork.
Yeah. So I think there's different opinions on that on that ideal age. I'd go actually a lot. I go a lot younger than that. But let's get back to you as a 6-year-old boy. You took this in your stride, right? You didn't.
Yes. Yeah, I
It's
took it in stride. And people ask me sometimes now, how do you remember that kind of thing? Well, you have like an episode memory. For example, I remember actually when I was 3 and I swam in the Pacific Ocean for the first time. I remember that because of the salt water. I got a mouthful and I was shocked. And because back home when I was in the water, it was fresh water. And so I remember running up the beach and telling my mother that, hey, there's salt in the water. So I was 3 years old. And I remember going out to California again. It was in the mid to late 50s. And we went to Echo Canyon. And we stood on the rim, and my adoptive dad, yelled something out, and it bounced back to him. Well, again, there is an episode that I remember because I'd never heard my voice before. We didn't have a tape recorder in those days. I'm not even sure they existed, but that's the first time I ever heard my voice. Yeah. So yes, I remember these experiences because they're episodes that are ingrained in my memory.
Yeah. So you referred to, or you likened your experience on your near-death experience as like being in the elevator. So yeah. Like being in an elevator. And so have you heard of Roald Dahl and his and the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? You seen that movie?
I have seen Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, yes.
So I think at the end of that book, Charlie gets into the Great Glass Elevator, and the Great Glass Elevator is the elevator of consciousness. It's Roald Dahl's metaphor for consciousness. So what we're talking about here, consciousness, is awareness, and so a shift in perspective. So when we have a shift in perspective, we can see the wood for the trees, right? Because we're going up.
Yeah.
So the theory that I shared with you last night was the fact that you'd had this shift in your awareness, you'd had this near-death experience that had led you to a shift in your experience, a shift in your consciousness, that mitigated against the shock of finding out at 6 that you were adopted. And you said immediately, that you said that you kind of agreed with that theory, or I asked you permission first. Can I put forward a theory to you, Doug? And yes. You said yes. And then I said, so I think that the near-death experience before you found out about being adopted, I think that helped you take that discovery in your stride, and you said yes. So yes, yeah. Can you put a bit more flesh on the bones of what I just said?
I certainly can. People, you've probably heard it said, no matter where you live, that things happen for a reason. And when you told me about that, the theory yesterday when we spoke, I couldn't help but think about how you were right, and how that things happen for a reason. That my death experience happened before I learned that I was adopted. I don't recall being, I recall being a normal child. Things upset me, but that didn't seem to upset me. And I think that's a good theory. I think that because from what we can see from others who, after they have their near-death experience as an adult, there's a big change that comes over them. Well, definitely a big change had come over myself as a young boy. I didn't realize it, whereas older adults would realize that because they could certainly compare their characteristics before and after the near-death experience. Yes, I agree with that theory.
Yeah. So I guess one of the fears that we have, one of the fundamental fears that human beings have, is this fear of death. And so I don't want to do this because I'm putting myself in harm's way. What having a near-death experience does is it take, what would you say, does it take away the fear of death? Because
yes, I would say it does. Now, let me expound on that just a little bit. Yes, it takes away the fear of death because you know what's going to come. In other words, faith ends when knowing begins. A lot of people have faith about the afterlife, but quite frankly, those of us that have a near-death experience have a knowing about the afterlife. So I think that's important, to know. So yes.
So what you're saying is that knowing is a gazillion times more powerful than faith. Is that what you're saying?
It's a comfort. But I will say that I do have a fear. I don't like pain, and when I see someone who's in a lot of pain and they're on their deathbed, I ask immediately doctors and such, can you give them something? Because, for the pain. Because our capacity for empathy shows that, in essence, all human beings are interconnected, in my opinion. Okay. I don't want to be in pain, and I don't like to see others in pain. So there is a fear of pain, and hopefully I won't have that when my time comes.
Yeah. Okay. So from that, I came to I came to a point during our conversation when I said something like, consciousness is unwoundable. And so what I meant by that is we have if we have experienced a primal wound, that the essence of who we are it is not affected by the adoption. And when I say the essence of who we are, I mean our life force. So I saw my father-in-law, father-in-law's body after he died, and it was clear to me that Bill had left the building, right? Like, no, it wasn't Elvis that had left the building. Bill had left the building. His life spirit, the force that animates him, had gone. It had gone somewhere else, and what was left was Bill's body.
Right.
And therefore, this essence of who we are, as consciousness, as awareness, as spirit, it isn't actually impacted by the primal wound. It's untouched, because that essence of who we are is untouchable.
Correct.
And yeah, you like when I have that conversation with most people, they look at me kind of funny, but you didn't, which I knew. Like I knew that we were going to be onto an incredible conversation, because incredible for me is when I'm learning more. Right, I'm best when I'm coming at curiosity. I'm like you said.
Oh, your consciousness is maturing as you learn more. Consciousness is working through us, moving us towards a more intense form of awareness. So every day when we learn something, it affects us. It affects our consciousness, our memory, etc. That's what I understand, because for every action, there's a reaction. And when something happens, you may not see the value in it until later on in life, when you can look back at it and talk about it with other people, so that that value all of a sudden becomes apparent.
Yeah. So that are you saying that that you finding meaning in your events, in the events that have happened to you, that's helped your consciousness grow? And
yes, everybody, no matter, or even if you don't accept the idea that you have an immortal consciousness, regardless of whether you accept it or not, these things are still moving you towards a more intense form of awareness. No matter if you have no religion, you don't attend a church, it's still there. And I think now I'm kind of a proponent of Christianity, and I believe that this is the kind of conversations that Jesus had with his apostles that we have no record of, at least not yet. They may dig up something any day on the sands out there. But the thing is, I think this has been well known. But if your parents don't teach this kind of thing, and you've got no way of learning about it, if you're in the middle of the Gobi Desert or something, you're still learning. Your consciousness is still maturing each and every day, whether you like it or not.
Cool. So I want to name check a guy whose name has just gone out my head. The book is called, it's come back. The book is called Power versus Force by a guy called David Hawkins, an American guy. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. And he sets out a scale of human consciousness, right? So we talked earlier on about the elevator. We talked about the Roald Dahl's elevator, the elevator of consciousness, the Great Glass Elevator. The Power versus Force by David Hawkins. There will be a link in the show notes, listeners. That describes what that level of consciousness is according to David Hawkins and his experiments. So that's a great way of understanding what the ladder of consciousness is. So why to you does consciousness seem unwoundable?
Well, because we learn from our daily life each and every day, and we build the maturity of our consciousness. And I think that's the point. I think that's the point of life, that we have all of these experiences, whether good or bad, but the end result is that they're good because they help us understand who we are. And who we are, like I said earlier, quite frankly, we're a being of light, and we actually emit photons. Now, that says something, and that we're not necessarily just our bodies. In other words, we have a consciousness, and that consciousness is that being of light. And I know a lot of people are going to go, oh, really? But the fact of the matter is, Google it, research it, do fact check on that, and you'll find that that's true. Yes. So right away, it tells me that our consciousness can't be wounded, really. Our beliefs might be hurt a little bit, especially like if you have a belief that your parents are actually your biological parents, only later in life to find out that they aren't. That's a wound, but it's part of the growth process of your consciousness as far as I'm concerned. You know, as an adoptee, I think a person has a right to know their heritage, but you don't have the right to a relationship with your biological family. If you're lucky enough, like I was, I've got relationships with both my father's side and my mother's side of my biological family, and I feel blessed because of that. Did
Yeah.
that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. I'm going to go back to the photons bit,
Okay.
because this idea that we are, we're emitting energy, that something I heard a few years ago from quite a conscious individual. He said that we are energy, and if you want, we have to find this stuff out for ourselves, right? So there's seeing this stuff. What Doug's encouraging you to do, and I would encourage you to do, is to explore this, do a little, what some people call these mind experiments. So here's a mind experiment for you listeners. Have you ever gone into a room and felt felt low energy? So something's happened, and you could, and you've been smiling, your day's been great. Then you've gone into a room and you feel that the energy has dropped. So that would say that we are transmitting energy, right? And and has the opposite effect. So have you ever felt in a low mood and then gone into a room, or gone into I'm thinking I'm actually thinking about a stadium, a football stadium, and a rugby stadium. So I've been to see concerts in stadiums. I've been to see matches in stadiums, and I've been a neutral observer of the Scottish national anthem being sung in Edinburgh, and then the Irish anthem being sung. No, it was Italian, actually, Italian. And I'm neither Scottish nor am I Italian. I wasn't rooting to either of those teams, and yet my mood was lifted. I felt the energy, right? And I've had the same in rock concerts, in stadiums, and in halls. That the energy is lifted because so many people are gathered together, and as you've helped me see this, right? I've picked up on other people's photons that they have been generating.
Yes, that's correct. Since we share the same essential consciousness with other human beings, it is not surprising that we sometimes sense each other's thoughts and intentions. And when you're around people with a positive attitude, you will pick up a positive attitude. And likewise, if you associate with people that are genetically, let's say, genetically predisposed to depression, and there are people that are predisposed to that, you will pick up on that negativity. That's why, as an adoptee, one of the reasons why I took the DNA test from 23andMe, and I also took it for Ancestry DNA test. I took them both because I wanted to compare them. I wanted to know, as an adoptee, and like I said, we've got a right to know our heritage, but not really a right for a relationship with a biological family. But what I wanted to know was, am I predisposed to diabetes? Is being a morning person something that I've inherited? How about insomnia that I get sometimes and get up at 5 o'clock in the morning? And pain tolerance, my response to caffeine, because I really enjoy caffeine. I enjoy that little pick-me-up in the afternoon. Some people have tea at 3, and I think you know what I'm saying by that. These are different things that are traits that we inherit. And I was curious about that. Now, I've been doing a lot of genealogy for many years. Because I was adopted, I think that's what sparked my interest in the genealogy when I was in my 20s. But now, doing this and taking the DNA test, long story short, it was just a matter of 3 or 4 years ago that I found out that I had two more sisters, and another brother. And over the years, I've come to find out that I've got three half sisters and three half brothers. Well, the sisters didn't know about each other, and they're only like 15 minutes away. So they became really good friends. It was like having a sister you never knew you had. Well, on my back to my birth certificate and the adoption papers, on the adoption papers, it says number of prior births, 1. So I knew from early on, I would say probably 10, 12 years old, that I had a brother or sister somewhere. So that also encouraged me to do the genealogy. But again, that all kind of ties together with my experiences in life, you know.
So what do you see as the implications or benefits or the follow-on from the fact that consciousness is unwoundable?
Well, the benefits of that is accepting the fact that things happen for a reason. And it may be later in life that you realize that it's all for a positive good. Being that things are for a positive good, even though we may or may not see it at the time, it tells me that there's a certain deep understanding that helps mature our consciousness. And I don't think it can be wounded because, like I said, things happen for a reason. There are learning experiences that people learn from. And I think that in itself, I don't think consciousness can really be wounded.
Okay. So when I'm, again, I get strange looks from this, from people in this, or just silence, right? So what I say to people is, I have felt primarily wounded, but I have not been primarily wounded. So what and why that I feel that I have not been primarily wounded is because consciousness is what we are, and consciousness is unwoundable. Therefore, I have not been wounded, and I'm separating how I feel from who I am. I am separating me from my trauma, which means that I am no longer a victim to a false belief.
Right.
And this is something that I have felt, I have discovered for myself. So I say, yeah, I have felt primarily wounded, but I have seen that I am fundamentally unwoundable, which means the end of victimhood.
Correct. Another topic, I guess, and this might be a good point to bring it up. Like you say, and I've said, you don't really, really think about who you're speaking to and what that topic is before you do it, because you get a sense of, we can sense each other's thoughts and intentions. So you don't necessarily want to bring up certain conversations with certain people because it's not going to go anywhere. Hostility and that kind of thing. But what I want to mention here is that my belief is that our consciousness is immortal. Now, I've also learned from studying scripture, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi, that was discovered, a lot of different scriptures and things other than just the Bible and the Torah. But I've learned that for the first 300 years, the doctrine of reincarnation was taught in Christianity. And it was in about the year 1350 that it was then thrown out of the church, and people were excommunicated who still believed in those things. At that time, there was no printing press. So there were monks that spent their life copying scriptures and putting together the Bible, that kind of thing. I've learned that there's two Bibles that they believe were part of the original Bibles that Augustine made. And there's like 27,000 corrections in the margins. And when I read that, and I read about these codexes, these Bibles that they put together, I thought to myself, if this is the Word of God, why is there 27,000 corrections in the margins? Why isn't the Word of God then the same as the Word of God today? Well, long story short here, like I said, the doctrine of reincarnation was taught to the apostles. It was taught to the disciples. 12 apostles each had 10 disciples. There were 120, and they went out into the world and they taught the doctrine of reincarnation because it is part of the gospel. And what it has to do with is the fact that our consciousness is immortal, and at some point we won't have to be reborn on the earth. We can remain, let's just say, in the heavens, okay? But the thing is, karma is very important because you have a life. I'll give you an example here. This is an example. From my reading, there's about reincarnation. There is one group of people, the Rosicrucians, who have taught that the cycle is about 144 Earth years. In other words, if you die at the age of 70, you have another 74 years that you would spend in the afterlife, in the pre-existence, so to speak. And I think that's interesting because in the Bible, there's a mention that Christ goes to teach the spirits in prison, but actually it's in heaven. Again, this is a text, something that was changed by the monks. And those are the spirits that were around prior to the flood. So the fact of the matter is, here's another indication that after we die, the learning process continues. And that's very important. Why does it continue? Well, because we have an immortal consciousness, and it's continuously growing, whether we like it or not. So we come back. Now, time after time, and again, in the Bible, all those references, most of them have been taken out, although there is one or two in there, especially about Elijah, who came back as John the Baptist, and they knew him not. But what I want to say about myself is this. If I go back 144 years, I go back to around from the year of my birth to the year 1809. Now, in the United States, if I was born in the United States, and I believe I was, the Civil War occurred, 1861, 1865. I believe, because I have a certain affinity for the South, that I was born in the South. Now, here's my point. I think, as for myself, I was born on a plantation. And I believe as I grew up, yes, I believe that we had slaves. Now, the process of the plantation, of course, most people know, and slavery, absolutely wrong, absolutely wrong. But the fact is, as the Africans grow up, the children were sold. So they were sold to another plantation. Well, when that happens, as children, they don't know who their parents are if they're sold young enough. So they grow up knowing that they're human beings, but they don't know who their parents are. What a horrible feeling. A horrible feeling. Now, being say I was a plantation owner then, I would look at them as property. Well, they weren't property, they're human beings. Now, so I think to myself now, I can look back and I think to myself, I love the Southern plantation style, the architecture, the food down south compared to up here in Michigan, which would be considered a northern state. When I moved away in the military, I moved down south, was down there for 20 years. Now, so how would a person learn the life's lesson that, selling children or taking them away from their family is the wrong thing to do? Well, I took a hard look at my adoption and I thought to myself, that's how they, not knowing who my real parents are, that must have been how the children in the South, when they were sold, felt. So I got a good taste of that longing to know who you are. And I'm certain, like I said, this experience of being adopted is something that helps my consciousness understand just how wrong slavery is by virtue of having a taste of this kind of life.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just say that and leave it at this, that to me, that my adoption was part of my karma.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Did the hair stand up on the back of your neck?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you consider that, now everybody's different as far as that's concerned, but if you consider things in a little different mindset, like I just related to you, makes sense.
Yeah. I have a similar-ish story from 23 years ago when I was on holiday in the Gambia, which was the Gambia, one of the tribes in the Gambia is the Mandinka tribe. And Alex Haley, the guy that wrote Roots, his great-great-grandfather, or I'm not sure, can't remember exactly, was Kunta Kinte of the Mandinka tribe, who was enslaved. And so we were on holiday in the Gambia, which is a 6 hours flight from here in the UK, pretty much due south, for some winter sun. And I found out on that holiday, on the second day of that holiday, that my friend had died in a car crash, and so I had to go home for his funeral. I was distraught, and I was sitting at the dinner table, and the local waiter could see there was something going on, and he asked me what's going on, and he said, "May his soul rest in peace." I told him what's happened. He said, "May his soul rest in peace." When I told the rep, the white British tour rep in the morning that I needed what had happened, her first words were, "You'll have to change your flight, and you'll have to pay to change your flight." And this for me was a seminal moment in which I hadn't considered myself racist, but I clearly was. I'd been brought up in this idea of the developing world, and I saw in that moment that was completely wrong. So that gave me a little taste of what's going on. Going back to the religious aspect on that, and this identity, this thing that we often get confused as identity. So what we're putting forward here is the idea that we are consciousness, we are awareness, we are the life force, we are our spirit. And from a religious perspective, I've heard this expressed as the burning bush said to Moses, I think it was, I am that I am. Do you know
Yes.
this? Yeah. So we say, I am, that's who we are. That's the being part of, spiritual being or human being, whichever. I am, and that's it. But then we say, I am happy, or I am hungry, or I am traumatized, or I am adopted, or I am not adopted, or I am a dad, or I am a podcaster. And the focus is always on the part of us that qualifies who we are, and we are not focused on the I amness. We're focused on which and the nature of that being, which is pre-thought, pre-trauma, before our psychology, before the events that have happened to us, before our thoughts, before our feelings, and we are. But who we are is lost in that second part of the sentence. We're lost. The I am gets overlooked for something that is fleeting.
Right. Actually, yes, it's called the Great I Am, and you can read more about that in Buddhist teachings.
Oh, right.
I believe, again, we have to take a look at this, but the fact of the matter is that Jesus was an investigator, in my opinion. I believe he was an Essene, and I believe that he was part of the Nazarene sect of the Essene brothers. I believe he went to an Essene school when he was 6 years old, as well as being with his parents. But when he turned 13, again, being Jewish, and a lot of people know the whole story, but when he turned 13 or 14, he was expected to marry. So all of a sudden, there were a lot of people coming to his home, Jewish men who wanted their daughters to marry Jesus because he was an upcoming person who could easily talk about the scriptures and how they relate to each and every person. Jesus, in my opinion, learned when he was growing up. Jesus was a genius, okay? In my opinion, he was a genius. When he was growing up in the Essene school, he learned about Plato, who was several hundred years before his time, before Jesus's time. Plato was a believer in reincarnation. There's more, but even the Essenes believed in reincarnation. And there's actually some sects of the Jewish people still believe in reincarnation. Anyway, long story short, but hopefully short, Jesus left. He went with by caravan along the Silk Road, the Spice Road, if you will. He was accompanied by a couple of his Essene brothers, and this is where he went, where he disappeared for 18 years. Now, Jesus wanted to investigate all these religions, the Hindu, the Buddhist, and there's many, many more. Well, there is a record that they've kept in Tibet about the master Isis, I-S-I-S, not ISIS, Isis, who was there and studied with them. Now, they've kept these records secluded because they didn't want them to disappear. And if anybody knows how to keep secluded records, it's the Buddhist monks in the temples in Tibet, in India. Anyway, Jesus learned and he disputed, and all the religions he learned. There was a Buddhist sect at that time. I can't think of the name of it started with the B, but anyway, he learned that. A lot of things. When he came back and started his ministry 18 years later, I believe he taught some of the things that he learned to be true, which included the fact that we are spiritual beings. I think he talked about that we are beings of light. And I think he explained to his apostles different things that we no longer know about because they have taken these out of scriptures. And again, the monks were told what to copy and what not by the Catholic. And at that time, it was the universal church. It wasn't necessarily the Catholic Church. But when that happened, of course, the Greek Christian church broke away, the Egyptian church broke away, and there's a lot of teaching there that people in the Western world don't know about. But a lot of my belief and my research, and I have done a lot of reading, I've learned that, for example, the Vatican has a library which is like 5 miles long. They don't even know what's in the library. It's never been thoroughly cataloged. Now, they keep it sealed under, perfect conditions so that the scrolls don't deteriorate. But those scrolls were brought back by the priest who went afar to find out all the teachings that they could find that may or may not be associated with Jesus, and brought them back to the Vatican. There is probably a ton of knowledge there in the Vatican library. It's just sitting there. Actually, it's got to crumble away with time, but they don't even know what's there. And what I just said about Jesus being gone, and where he went and where he studied and that kind of thing, there have been expeditions, mostly around the late 1800s, early 1900s, that have documented this. Now, you're going to have people that are going to dispute this. There's no question about it, because they've been raised thus and so. And whatever's in the Bible is gospel and cast in stone. Well, it's not. And people need to realize that. And I think one of my favorite parables, and let's see if I can get this right, is about how it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven. When Jesus gave this, he was talking to a maritime community on the shores of Galilee. He didn't say camel. He said needle, because the thing is, they were talking about a needle that repairs the net. So, there's a lot of parables that have been written and misinterpreted, and that's one of them. Camel and Hamel are very closely connected, and that is the difference. He didn't say a camel going through the eye of a needle. It's easier for it. That just doesn't make any sense. People there would never have gone to the gates of Jerusalem. That's like a 90-mile trek, and in sandals and hot sand, it's a little uncomfortable. They wouldn't have a clue what Jesus was talking about in that parable. So that's just one of many examples. I don't recall it 100%. I wish I did, because now's the time that I should tell.
Well, one of the things, I name check this guy called Rupert Spira all the time on the podcast. And he talks about this thing called non-duality, which I mentioned to you last night. And this is the essence of all religions, boil down to the fact that, we are consciousness, we are awareness, we are the screen upon which the movie of our life is playing out. And he talks about the fact that each when he talks about different religions using words that are fit for purpose and fit for the time that they're in, and he talks about this idea of insight and us going east, and he talks about going east intellectually, if not physically, and studying the Buddhists, studying Buddhism, and the fact that the cultural element to the language makes it mystical, and the our so we're lost in the cultural mysticism of the time, and it doesn't make sense. And so each time it is retold, this stuff is retold, we tell it so it fits with the culture of the place that we're in and the time that we're in. It's culturally adept and culturally attuned. But what his work does is it strips out the stuff that doesn't make sense to us in the early 2023 in the Western world.
Well, I understand that. And again, I think this is why Jesus talked in parables, because you have some people that have this kind of understanding, others have this. So he spoke in parables in such a way that everyone could understand it at their own level. Now, that's brilliant. And like I said, Jesus was a genius. You're talking about the I am, the great I am. Well, when he selected his apostles, again, like I was saying, it's not surprising that sometimes we can sense each other's thoughts and intentions. And I'm certain that he had the capability when he picked his apostles to sense these people and their abilities or what their abilities could be. So when he taught them the gospel, he taught them about the great I am, who they were. That is, he brought the gospel back. And I'm going to say back because I believe from my readings that when you go back to Noah and the ark, I believe that they had the original gospel, Noah did, in the ark. In other words, it wasn't, and then it became forgotten over the centuries until Jesus brought it back. And I think that's important for people to understand. Now, I made a mention there's going to be people watching this that are going to think to themselves, well, then Doug must believe, that everybody was wiped out with Noah's Ark. Well, I do. Now, but I want to say this. When I had my DNA done by 23andMe, it came back and told me that I had 243 variants of Neanderthal DNA. Now, apparently, there's 2,400 variants that they know of, and they acquired this from the 12 skeletal remains that they have gotten from a cave somewhere in France. There was enough DNA evidence that they put together the Neanderthal genome. So I'm sitting here in front of you and I'm saying, look, I have 243 variants of Neanderthal, and how is it that happened? If Noah and his ark wiped out, how can I be part Neanderthal? Well, the fact of the matter is that Noah's sons' wives had to be descendants of the Neanderthals. It's very simple. They, and then from that point on, Neanderthal blood was in a lot of us. Not only Neanderthal, but Denisovian, I think it's called. Same thing. I've looked into that too. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that Neanderthals and humans mated, and Neanderthals disappeared, whether it was from a virus, like maybe they had COVID or something like that, but Homo sapiens remain. Well, then when the branch that we are, the Homo sapiens sapiens, makes perfect sense that there's Neanderthal blood. So they're just discovering a lot of things that they're digging up with these cities that they believe through archaeological evidence that were created 10 and 12,000 years ago. So how did that happen? If everything was destroyed, with the Noah's flood? Well, there were some brilliant people back then, and that goes on and on. But the fact is, that we're always becoming, we're always learning, And that's why I did the DNA 23andMe test. I wanted to know also, if I was going to die, diabetes, or what other things are in my DNA that I should tell my children about. So I did it that way. But back to the great I am, that's an Eastern philosophy. And I believe not only did Christ teach that as gospel and who we are, and he must have been questioned by the apostles. The apostles weren't dumb. They had, like I said, the disciples, each of them had 10 that they would then instruct from their learnings. And I'm sure Jesus watched over that to make sure the instructions were correct. He was a manager. He had to have been. And he spoke many languages too, when it comes right down to it. But the fact of the matter is, there was a lot taught. And like I said, Jesus had to have answered a lot of the questions that the apostles had, like, I can't even give you an example, but, he had to have answered questions. We just don't know what those answers are because we don't have the scripture to tell us anymore.
No. Well, your curiosity has definitely led you to some fascinating places, and you've discovered the stuff for yourself. So, listeners, I'd always say, you got to kind of discover this stuff for yourself, because there's no such thing as a secondhand insight or a secondhand epiphany. We've got to discover this stuff for ourselves. So, I'm going to link in the show notes to Doug's Amazon profile page and his books, because he's done a lot of great work in this. I'm going to be getting the book that you wrote on about your NDE, and then but there are other books as well that you've written about the genealogy. So I'd encourage those, if this chap is clearly a great raconteur and storyteller. So I've no doubt the book is going to be unputdownable. So thanks a lot, Doug. Is there anything else that you'd like to close with that I've not given you a chance to?
Well, I think, I wrote the book Family Found, a DNA journey, because before we get, started doing that, we need to, if we find out that we've been adopted, we need to carefully consider, how we need to set reasonable expectations about what you may find and how it will affect others. Because if you want to, you want to be very careful with how you express yourself, and not just burst out with things. And I wrote the book Family Found. I wanted people to see how I went through and located my biological family. It's food for thought and food for consideration, because if you want to have a relationship with your biological family, you don't want to come on too strong, but you do want to know about your heritage. And that's the point of the book, Family Found, that I wrote. The other books, of course, are, Christianity and Reincarnation, and Death and Back, Where Did I Go? Which all, center around my experiences and my thoughts on these things. And I wrote these books for two reasons. I wanted to tell the story in case others were thinking about doing their own research for their own biological family. And I wrote the book to tell my children, my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, because my children never knew the whole story of my adoption and my search. I have not had the time. Like I didn't have the time to ask my father his recollection of when he brought me back to life. So that's my purpose for the books. And Simon, I want to thank you. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and best wishes to everyone on their hunt for the biological family.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, listeners. Thanks, Doug. It's been a great conversation. We'll speak to you very soon. Thank you. Goodbye.
All right.